Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds. Hello, I'm Paul Obitelli and you're listening to edition 93 of THA Talks, the alternative podcast show from the UK, bringing you weekly shows and all the best interviews we can get our sticky mitts on. If you'd like to check out our full archive, just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. Our talks include news, conspiracies, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion, and much more. For anyone who'd like to contact us and give us some feedback or maybe recommend a guest for the show, you can email us at info@thatalks.com, or you can go to our website and contact us through there. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show via our RSS feed, and you can also find us on iTunes and Stitcher and many other podcast directories out there. Well, hello ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in again here on THA Talks. Good to be back as always. It's only been 24 hours since we last met here on this lovely show. We've got a very controversial subject today, which we've been telling you about, and some people may not have even tuned into the show because it's a sensitive subject, and some may turn it off halfway through. My feelings on subjects like this is freedom of speech should never be oppressed, no matter what, whether someone's being stupid, whether someone's being smart, whether someone's being malicious or simply misguided. Freedom of speech is ultimately the most important thing. We're free to have our own opinions, we're free to stick our two fingers up, or we're free to walk away or say what we want. Ultimately, I think the truth always rises to the top, and the lies have to be held in place. And I think whatever your opinions on this subject, I think in 200, 300 years' time, the truth will be standing there for whoever's researching it to see it at those times. And there's no harm in discussing whether you're questioning certain things in history or whether you're defending them. Ultimately, we've all got a right to have an opinion, and I'm a little bit worried about what's going on in the world today regarding free speech and these threats that seem to be implicit in a lot of things our politicians are saying. And I think that's my biggest worry. So I regret if this show does offend anyone out there with passionate views about this. But ultimately, we can all take from it what we want and leave whatever we don't want. And that's basically how I see it. So I think with that little disclaimer up front there, I think it's time to go to the other side of London for a surge and a dramaturge and a geezer called David Parry.
Oh, the games people play now, every night and every day now, never meaning what they say now, never saying what they mean. Good evening, Mr. Obitelli, how are you?
Good evening, David Parry, how are you?
I am frustrated.
Why are you frustrated?
I have spent hours travelling around this city through short journeys which should have been very, very short, because the whole public system of transport is clogged up by endless, pointless families and their ugly, ugly children.
Well, you're here now on THA Talks, so your life has improved for the time being.
It has improved, and I suppose that's part of the wonder of modern life, but there's another reason to leave London, of course. You know that's my plan. But yeah, THA always improves my life.
It is a bit of a rat race, London, at the moment, isn't it?
Oh, it's just awful. Dear foreign world, if you want to move here, check your facts or have your heads examined.
Well, we've got a bit of a controversial one today, haven't we? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, Paul, I mean, some of my time, as you know, is dipping into academic circles. So I know when things make an interesting Barney, and, that's as it should be, I suppose. But I need to confess on this particular issue, deep down I'm bewildered. I just don't know what to say or think. That's a confession before we begin. I'm not saying anybody's right or anybody's wrong. I don't know. And I'll tell you why I'm being that evasive. It struck me mid this year that there's so much active disinformation. Half the time now, when I get presented with ideas like this, I don't know whether I'm coming or going. So, we started this show to encourage free speech, to encourage free thought and open minds, and we're sticking to that. But I confess, I'm bewildered. I mean, I went to Auschwitz with some Polish friends a few years ago. So the camp exists. We walked around it. They were very, very tense. So obviously something happened. But as I say, I'm waiting to be convinced. I'm waiting for someone to show me the smoking gun. That's what they see these days, isn't it? And I'm open to debate. The minute anyone isn't open to debate, we've got a problem.
Okay, well, this evening we'll be speaking with Alexander Barron. Alexander is an author, journalist and an independent researcher. He's been involved in small publishing since the late 80s, writing about various mendacity and disinformation, while claiming to expose Zionism and the official narrative of the Holocaust. He's published a number of books and pamphlets on a variety of subjects, delving into some of the most controversial subjects around. He also writes for the popular online journal TLN. So let's go and meet Alexander. Hi there, Alexander. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Well, this subject, it's a subject that David and I have wanted to cover on the show for a while now, because it is out there, and it is a controversial one. But
not as controversial as you think it is.
Right. Well, I mean, you cover a lot of controversial subjects, like stuff that maybe a lot of people won't go near and stuff. I mean, what got you getting into all this kind of stuff?
It started off really about 1976. I found a publication on a train which mentioned it, and I didn't pay any attention to it really. It's about the end of 1979, beginning of 80, and I started reading it in depth, and it was obvious to me that we're being lied to systematically. From the early 90s, I did quite a lot of research of my own, including at the Public Record Office, or the National Archives, as we now to call it. And the whole thing is complete nonsense. Now, first of all, there is, with a caveat, there is no such thing as Holocaust denial, because nobody denies the Holocaust. So there are two caveats to that. One is that you will find ill-informed people everywhere who will have all sorts of weird beliefs. We've got this more and more now. Now that the world and his dog is online, you got the social media, you got alternative media. Anyone can go on YouTube and make a video. Anyone can write a blog, which is fantastic. But the downside is that you got all sorts of people on there, cranks, trolls, people who don't understand how to assess evidence. So if you want to look up, say, the Kennedy assassination, you'll find dozens of different explanations. The best evidence indicates that John F. Kennedy was murdered by a lone assassin, the bizarre Lee Harvey Oswald, and there was no. It's possible Oswald may have had some sort of influence, but the best evidence is that Oswald did it and did it alone. But you'll find all sorts of stuff on there, and these people aren't bigots or haters necessarily. They just don't understand. So you've got people accused the Jews, the Zionists, the Israelis, the Mossad, the military-industrial complex, the FBI, the CIA, the Russians, and Uncle Tom Cobley and all, JFK even. LBJ rather. In fact, LBJ was said to have believed that there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy. Yeah, when you assess the evidence, it was the work of one man. So you've got all sorts of people spouting nonsense out there. And the other thing is that there were some people who have taken to calling themselves Holocaust deniers. Eric Hunt, a young revisionist, who's done some actually brilliant work. Check out his videos. The one it was used Steven Spielberg's film, The Last Days, as the basis of that. He calls it The Last Days of the Big Lie. He's done one on Treblinka. Amazing work. And the bottom line is that, the real Holocaust was World War II. I mean, there's no doubt about that. A lot of Jews died in World War II, but so did a lot of other people. Was there an extermination program? No. Certainly not. Certainly, there was not an intentionalist. The intentionalist view of the Holocaust has gone out the window. The idea that there was a plan from the beginning by Hitler and all the German high command to exterminate Jews is completely debunked. And the 6 million figure, no. I mean, the 6 million figure has been going from certainly 1912 is the earliest version of that Holocaust, a Holocaust of 6 million Jews. And the fact is lots of people have told a great many lies about it, and they continue to tell lies. They continue to portray the media version of the Holocaust, which is in total conflict with the one you find in exterminationist books. So it's complete nonsense. What always amazes me about the subject is this theory it generates. If, for example, you were to take, supposing you had a white academic in the Deep South, and he was to publish a long, meticulously referenced academic book about slavery, saying that the slave trade was a myth. Basically, only a few 100,000 Africans came to America as indentured servants, and the plantations were basically farms, and everybody was treated well, and there were a few nasty things happen, but nobody would take that seriously. But on the other hand, nobody would call, some people may call for his resignation or him to be assessed by psychiatrists, but you wouldn't have people protesting in the streets. You wouldn't have laws against it. People would laugh at it. And of course, slavery in the Deep South is beyond living memory. Always has been from when I was alive, and there's no taboo about that. But the so-called Holocaust, World War II, is within living memory just about now. Certainly was when I was growing up, and all this hysteria about it. It really is complete nonsense.
Well, it sounds like you're pretty keen on highlighting the difference between Holocaust denial and Holocaust revision.
Well, Holocaust denial is a media term. It doesn't mean anything. It's a complete nonsense. As I said, no, nobody who's done his homework denies the Holocaust. Nobody denies the concentration camps. Nobody denies Jews died of them. Nobody denies that times Jews were murdered by the Nazis. Nobody denies any of that. No rational person.
Okay, so if I'm to say to you that, right, I do believe there was several million Jews, they were taken, thrown in concentration camps, and most of them were gassed to death by the Nazis as a part of their genocide plan, where would you go to first to prove to me that was wrong?
Well, it's just a claim, isn't it? Look, the fact is that after the Second World War, they found Belsen and Dachau and these other camps, which, I mean, you've seen the Belsen burial pits. This is what Professor Butz called the mass propaganda proof. You've seen the Dachau gas chambers. I mean, in 1945, the Daily Mail published a book, Lest We Forget, which included photographs of these gas chambers, which are actually delousing chambers. I remember telling somebody in 1980 that these were delousing chambers. He laughed in my face. But it's committed now. A very interesting article published in the New Statesman in 1979, The Men Who Whitewashed Hitler. I've got a rather poor scan of it on my website, on my main website, by historian Gitta Serini. They decided at this point in time, something would have to be done to address the revisionists. So this is a refutation, a supposed refutation. So it goes on paragraph after paragraph of what horrible people these revisionists are, how terrible Hitler was, he created a police state, etc. Yada yada yada, laughing, and then the refutation. Then comes the refutation. But sometimes mistakes have been made that must be addressed and corrected. Some books on the Holocaust are fakes, etc. And that's it's a really weird sort of refutation. The camps that we were shown, including Auschwitz, the evidence of exterminations in them was close to zero. So what happened then is that the we're told now is the Action Reinhardt camps, Treblinka, Majdanek, Sobibor, and Chelmno. I'll get a bit. I haven't done this for a while. These were extermination camps, but the reality is they were transit camps. A lot of Jews died during the Second World War. I mean, Nazi Germany was no holiday camp, but the whole thing about the exterminations is complete nonsense. Well, having said that, as I pointed out in my paper, which I delivered in Tehran, that I believe that there were limited gassings at one camp, and of course there was the so-called euthanasia program. In fact, if you read Professor Butz, he points out his belief is that this myth developed from the euthanasia program.
Right. Well, I mean, I can hear the voices among some of our listeners now, pointing to the dead bodies and the horrific scenes and the reports of the military when they arrived in these camps and how horrified they were. What were they horrified about?
Well, it was typhus and starvation. I mean, during the last days of the war, you can do what I did. You can go to Q and read the official reports. In fact, you can find the Belsen trial is online. The official book on the Belsen trial. It's a bit like it's disingenuous. It's like taking a photograph of a woman with two black eyes and saying that her husband beat her, and then it turns out that she's been in a car accident or something like that. It's disingenuous to point to victims of typhus, which is a wasting disease anyway, and to claim they were victims of gas chambers. It's complete nonsense.
Okay, well, fairly recently in the British press, we've had the reports of the 94-year-old former Nazi Oscar Groening. He's just recently been jailed at the age of 94, and for his crimes working for the SS during World War II, where he actually admitted himself his involvement in the gassing of so many Jews. Why would he say that if it wasn't true?
Well, if he denied it, he's got no chance of coming out of jail. But again, Professor Butz covered this. The Auschwitz trial, the 1963 Auschwitz trial, which lasted for about 18 months, a long time. The purpose of that was to establish the legend, as he calls it. If you look at the sentences that were handed out, you have to think, why were these people given relatively trivial sentences for their crimes? And it was because it was not to create any sort of justice. It was to perpetuate the legend. He cites the case of one Nazi guard who was actually the real reason he was tried was for he threw a bottle at a prisoner and it killed him. And this made more of an impact than all this nonsense about gas chambers. There's actually in the Belsen trial, I raised this quite a lot. There's the testimonies of two women who claimed to actually have been in the gas chamber and survived. Which, if you can explain that away, it's complete. Regina Bialek and Sophia Lewinska. It's complete nonsense.
Right.
People just said anything, basically.
Okay. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring David in now to have some input in this. David, what do you make of this?
Well, I mean, it's fascinating material. I mean, I count Alexander a fascinating source of information and a friend of mine. I want to widen this out a bit. Alexander, I mean, we got to know it. I knew you by reputation before I knew you for hauling people out of the House of Commons against their will. It
wasn't quite like that. It was me who got hauled out of the House of Commons. It was out the. I served a writ at Parliament. Yeah.
Do you mind sharing that story, because it's a wonderful story?
No, I served a libel writ at Parliament on our mutual friend Jerry Gable. It's contempt of Parliament to do that. I did it for the publicity. So that was in December 1993, and they printed a whole issue of Hansard just for me. So quite happy with that.
Well, I mean, you were actually the man that I believe took Searchlight to court and won. I mean, that incredibly disreputable magazine. Any thoughts on that, Alexander? You know, I mean, what I hear when we get onto subjects like this is the sheer level of disinformation permeating our society at the minute. You know, so what's your view on that man, on that magazine, and disinformation generally?
Well, I mean, it's easy to say these people are uniquely evil, but the thing I've noticed over the past few years is that all these social justice warriors, be they campaigning against the chimera of racism, eternal anti-Semitism, fascism, sexism, homophobia, or even just against the death penalty, they just lie. The bottom line is that they churn out all manner of stuff. Even the anti-smoking campaign, it's like they produce these specious statistics and this ludicrous research, so-called, and they just lie and lie and lie. And because they have a just cause, supposedly just cause, the media goes along with it. The Reprieve organisation is a great one on this. I don't know if you're familiar with it. They campaign on. It's a registered charity. They campaign against the death penalty. Well, I've got no problem with people campaigning against the death penalty. No problem with that at all. But when they churn out lies on behalf of convicted murderers, you know, whitewashing them, trying to make out that they didn't commit the crimes they committed, or other sorts of nonsense. It's just gratuitous lies. I mean, and you know, Searchlight is, well, they're past masters, but they're you know, there are people who are just as bad in other fields. Well, a lot of these so-called Jewish organisations. I mean, the thing I always stress is that this is nothing to do with the Jews. You know, to me, the Jews are the men in black hats and kaftans, and these organisations, the ADL and that, they're political organisations. They maybe have a racial agenda as well, but you know, people attack them and they call their retort is that you're anti-Semitic. Well, no, just because you attack just because you expose liars who happen to be Jews, and the feminists use the same thing. You know, if you challenge their statistics on rape or sexism or anything else, then you got to be a misogynist or whatever. No, you know, it's not women I hate, it's liars. There's nothing wrong with hating liars.
Well, I mean, no. I mean, you've got a formidable background. You're a well-known journalist, and
alternative media only. So
yeah, but you're a well-known name, and you're a truth warrior. I seem to remember in my research somebody described you as that. And
I'm flattered.
Well, I mean, and so you should be. I mean, you stick to your guns, and you do look for the truth, and I think that's admirable.
Well, the other thing I always do is if you're wrong, change your mind. You know.
Yeah.
And we could all be duped, and believe me, I've been duped big time in my life, and it's not a pleasant sensation. But the thing is, a lot of people when they are duped, they it's almost like a Stockholm syndrome situation. That they go along with the deception. If somebody lies to me, I get angry. You know, why did you lie to me? Yeah. I don't care what the cause is. You know, you can taint any good cause with lies. I'm not saying I'm more honest than anybody else in my personal life, you know. I wouldn't lie to get a blonde into bed or something like that. No, seriously. In the public arena and in politics, it's important to be truthful. And the thing that amazes me is that the lies are so transparent, they're easily refutable. I mentioned Reprieve earlier. I'll give you an example. This is non-controversial, and we're not as controversial as the so-called Holocaust. Clive Stafford Smith, the guy who founded Reprieve, he tells his story. He was campaigning on behalf of one of his pet project, one of his pet murderers, and he comes up with this anecdote. You find it all over the internet. That in 1990, this particular person he's talking about here is a bloke called Maharaj who murdered two men in a hotel room, a father and son, in 1986. And he says the claim comes out. He puts it in his book that the U.S. Supreme Court has decided that whether or not a man is innocent is is irrelevant to whether or not he's executed. It says this, so the guy can be executed, the guy can be on death row and executed even if he's innocent. And he cites as that Herrera v. Collins, 1993. And you'll find this claim all over the internet. But if you go to Herrera v. Collins, which is on one of the official legal websites, you look up the judgment, what does it actually say? It says that Herrera, he murdered 2 police officers on separate occasions, shot them to death. He pleaded guilty to one of these murders. He was sentenced to death. 8 years later, his brother dies, and suddenly he blames his brother. And the Supreme Court looked at it, and what it said was the guilt or innocence of a person has to be decided in legal proceedings. And you should look over the whole of the proceedings. In this case, it stretched over 10 years to decide what to do. And it rejected his claim of hearing additional evidence. Herrera was trying it on. This isn't the first time something like this happened. So the Supreme Court rejected his application. But it didn't say this guy may be innocent. It can be executed. It says that we're not going to hear this so-called fresh evidence because it's nonsense. But if you find all over the internet, you'll find the claim that the Supreme Court said that innocent people can be executed. It's just complete lies, and you find this in all sorts of fields.
Yeah, I mean, there are lies, there are damn lies, and then there's the internet.
Yeah, well, that's the bottom line.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned briefly you've actually authored 2 books on revisionist views of the Holocaust. I mean, what originally sparked them, and what's your view now? Has it changed since those books? Has it evolved? Do you feel more confused? I mean, what's your position now, Alexander?
Well, as I mentioned before we come on air, the whole thing is about World War II and the Holocaust. Everything isn't about Jews. Isn't about Jewish organisations. The whole thing we've got now is victim narratives. And if you establish a victim narrative, the feminists have done this. Various groups have done it. If you challenge the victim narrative, you're challenging victims, survivors, or whatever. And basically that is the whole thing. It's lots of these groups have established victim narratives, and I mean, with this still witch hunt that's still going on, celebrities accused of crimes against the young. If you look at the actual evidence of these cases, it's complete nonsense. I mean, it's why this is how partly how I came to this conclusion. If you look at the Savile allegations, the popular wisdom is that Jimmy Savile indecently assaulted hundreds of girls, a few boys, and he raped maybe a couple of dozen or 3 dozen women. But if you look at the actual evidence, it's complete rubbish. Most of the allegations can't be tested one way or the other, but quite a few of them have been proven false, and the police have just accepted this happened. A couple of bloggers have done some detailed research on the case. The original Duncroft allegations against Savile are shown to be false by chronology, and some of the claims made against him are so absurd as to be. You have to wonder about the sanity of the women who made them. There's a wonderful woman who claims to have been groped by him in hospital in the 1950s. She said her own father brought Savile in and allowed him to interfere with her, and then her father did the same thing. And you have to wonder at their sanity. And lots of these other things. I mean, last week I read Jim Davidson's book, the comedian. And the allegations against him, one woman accused him of already raping her at the doors of the London Palladium, in a side room for that. He said that there was no public access. When he told the police this, she changed the venue to Slough Pavilion, and when that was refuted at all, it went away. There's just so many liars out there for whatever reason, whether after publicity, money, or settling a score. Maybe they just got something wrong with their heads.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there who are demented, and you can't trust anyone.
Well, a sad fact of modern times, I suspect. I mean, that there's passive disinformation and then there's active disinformation. I mean, people conspire, political groups conspire. Anybody that thinks politics is a group of learned men discussing ideas knows nothing about the reality of politics. Do you sense the arm of Mossad in any of this? I mean, who's rewriting all of these histories?
Well, it's you're looking for something that isn't there. You're looking for a hub. You're looking for the elders of Zion or whatever. I'm not actually that cynical about politicians, MPs. A lot of them do a good job for their constituents. I know that from personal experience. A lot of them are sincere, but there's so much pressure on them from these groups campaigning against this, that, or the other, and they don't know what to do. I mean, at the moment, you've got this in Scotland. You've got this steelworks has become as being closed, and there's pressure being put on MPs to maybe to subsidise it to keep going. But what is the point of subsidising a company to produce something nobody's buying? And there are other things that can and should be done, but there's all sorts of pressure put on MPs, and it's all the pretext is it's for the public good, but it's for domestic abuse victims or for drug addicts or whatever. They end up passing these laws, and they make the situation worse. So I'm not that cynical about MPs. I think this whole MPs expenses scandal was complete nonsense. Yeah. But having said that, there are some evil people out there. A few in Parliament as well. But we need to be a lot more sceptical about any claims that are made by any group, whatever their professed ideals, because maybe they're just making work for themselves.
Oh, I think you're right there. We all have to be a lot more philosophical. I mean, I can't find in my notes. I'm looking at my notes at the minute. Somebody accused you once of being overly sympathetic to Islam, and I can't, because that's such an amazing comment, and I can't for the life of me.
Well, I've also been accused of being an Islamophobe. No. I mean, look, what is happening in the Middle East really is little to do with Islam. I mean, the world's biggest Islamic country is Indonesia, and there's very little aggravation there. I mean, there were some bombings a few years back, but Indonesia and countries of that in that area, there isn't the turmoil. What is happening in the Middle East is it's akin to what happened in England in 1642. Their own revolution. And now the Syrian crisis, that puts Zionism into perspective. A lot of people on the far right see Zionism as the root of all evil, but what's happened over the past few years, Arabs killing Arabs. I mean, there's a lot more people have died in Syria than in Palestine. Of course, that doesn't, two wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah.
But I've never said Muslims are angels. But the bottom line of Islam and of Judaism and of Christianity, the world's great religions, is like the parable of the Good Samaritan. Help a guy if you can. Don't be taken in by hard luck stories. Help a guy if you can. Or if you can't help him, at least don't kick him when he's down.
Yeah.
And what really does annoy me is the way idiots on the far right here sought to demonise Islam, and Nick Griffin did this intentionally. And some have even tried to make an alliance with Zionism. Well, no, thank you. They're no friends of ours. Especially at a time when many Jews have woken up to the reality of Zionism.
Let me jump in there. I mean, what is your attitude to sort of the protocols of the elders of Zion and all that? I mean, I always assumed it was a fabrication by the Tsar's secret police, but am I right or wrong on that?
Well, that is the perceived wisdom. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, but it isn't an anti-Semitic document. It's a mystical document. I mean, the whole thing about anti-Semitism or anti-anything. I mean, I have a very narrow definition of anti-Semitism: hating Jews because they're Jewish. Denying so-called the Holocaust is not anti-Semitic. It may be wrong, but it is not anti-Semitic. Claiming Jews control the media is not anti-Semitic, especially as far as Hollywood is concerned. It's true. But hating Jews because they're Jewish. Now, the Protocols of Zion, is if you read it, it's virtually unreadable. There's complete nonsense in there. It's a mystical document. People like David Icke have taken to promoting it, but they believe in the Illuminati and all sorts of stuff. The same people who believe that will believe in there's a massive satanic abuse conspiracy running the country or even the world. And the people who believe in this, they're not necessarily haters, but they're not necessarily sane either. They just don't know. They don't understand how to assess evidence. And of course, there's so many fabricated documents. I mean, the Elm Guest House list is another one. That's far more recent. But there's the Sisson documents. There's a Noviev letter, the Monistus Decreto against the Jesuits. All sorts of stuff. They're part of the course.
So before I get Paul back in, am I right in understanding that your view was actually quite a well-known view a couple of years ago, that really you're looking at transit issues? The labour camps were put up as transit camps. I mean, do you have an overall view about what happened, or do you think it's piecemeal and all over the place?
Well, I think there was definitely some. There were some murders of Jews in camps to settle scores and that. But Treblinka and the other actual Reinhardt camps, they were transit camps. I don't believe there was any plan, certainly from the word go, to exterminate Jews because they were Jewish. It was always an offence to kill Jews under German law. Well, one thing really amazed me, from 1993 onwards, I went through every issue of the Jewish Chronicle for the entire Nazi era and for a few years on either side. And some of the stuff I found there prior to World War II was amazing. People jailed for attacks on Jews, and a guy given a prison sentence for trying to steal money from Jews. All sorts of stuff. So there was a rule of law as such. But having said that, I would rather not be a Jew in Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And we have to keep sense of proportion.
Paul, I think we'll get you back in. What do you think of all this?
Thank you very much. All interesting stuff. Yeah, I think it's interesting when we're talking about anti-Semitism and so forth. I mean, I've always questioned my government with so many things they do. A lot of the time, I'm very reluctant to say we when I'm referring to them because of the things they get into. Like, I mean, now I have no support of what they're up to at the moment at all.
You mean the Middle East?
Yeah, exactly. It's
insane, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. But if I was to find out that they were controlled by Jews or they were Jewish, it wouldn't really change anything, because if they weren't, I'd still be attacking them anyway. They are a group of people. I mean, there's good and bad in everyone, so we know that as we're all humans, so we should know that as a fact anyway. I think it was interesting bringing up the new right, which I have got a certain amount of sympathy for in a lot of their arguments, and sometimes they do go unheard. I mean, they're petrified that they think there is a real threat to Europeans and the white race. They think there's agendas, hostile agendas towards them. And to an extent, I can see where they're coming from with some of that. But I mean, you can't just take a handful of white people, big wigs, and judge the whole white race on those people, which a lot of people do. But at the same time, they like to point the finger at the Jews because of a handful of Jews.
The Jewish question is the Jewish world conspiracy is a foyer d'oeuvre. It's you've got anti-Semites, I mean real anti-Semites, who believe Jews control the government, and Jewish leaders also believe they control the government, and they believe that any time they shout jump, the government is going to say how high. It doesn't always happen in this country, and it did happen in America for a long while, but it's you've got a lot of Muslims there now, and of course you've got I say that a lot of Jews have woken up to the way they're being exploited by Zionism. No. I mean, the thing about whites are trying to establish their own victim narrative. I mean, yeah, the white race is under threat. Our survival is under threat. But you're gonna tell a guy who's living in a mud hut or a sort of hovel in the backwater somewhere that we deserve special treatment. I don't think so. He's not going to have much sympathy for you, is he? Everybody's had a hard time.
Yeah.
The question is, how can we make it better for everyone? And social justice warriors don't make it better.
Well, yeah, absolutely, I agree. I mean, it's ridiculous because you can't really argue with any of the mainstream politically correct points without being called a misogynist, a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, an Islamophobe. I mean, what does that even mean? I mean, it is really annoying because it's tackling free speech and the freedom to argue. But onto the Holocaust point again. In 1988 we had the Leuchter report. What do you make of that?
Well, yeah, I've got it's a long time since I read the Leuchter report, but I've got no real quibbles with it. The thing you have to ask is how could they have killed? Sometimes they claim 2,000 or 3,000 people in a chamber. They just shoved them in, locked the door, and then drop the gas in. Well, it doesn't work like that. It just doesn't work like that. It's complete fiction. Why use gas when you can use bullets? It's complete nonsense. I mean, if you read the descriptions of the gassing, they're complete nonsense. And we know that after the gas chamber at Auschwitz was rebuilt after the war. I mean, you have to use a bit of common sense here. It's complete nonsense from beginning to end. And if you read the descriptions by Bialek and Litwinska, they're complete nonsense. And why is there such a big deal over it? Why is there such hysteria over it? As I say, think back to what I said about slavery. Would anyone get into such a pother over it? No, of course they wouldn't. You can challenge it almost anything else. You can challenge almost anything else in history, and it won't cause such hysteria. The communists, the Stalin Society, which we believe is still extant, they claim that the extent of basically Stalin never ordered anyone murdered, and that there were famines, etc., and it was all a big accident. I don't go along with that, but I have spoken to people who've been behind the Iron Curtain, including one academic, and they say that the death toll of communism is being greatly exaggerated. I'm prepared to believe that, but it doesn't generate such hysteria as the Holocaust for some reason, for whatever reason. It gives the vested interest behind it.
Right, well, I mean, I thought that was an interesting point because I know the official narrative response to that was that the concentrations that you'd use to gas humans, to gas mammals, is less than it would be to actually kill lice that would have been used in the delousing chambers. And that's why there was no residue found in the Leutcher report. So I mean, I just thought that was interesting, and it's interesting one to look at.
It's a very inefficient and dangerous way to kill people. One of the books I consulted in my second book on the Holocaust was Industrial Poisons in the United States by Alice Hamilton, published in about 1925. And there was a report in there of, at that time, they used to use zyklon in America, and or cyanide, I guess. And there was a report of people killed in a restaurant. I think upstairs in a restaurant because it wasn't done properly. Very, very dangerous thing to do, you know. I just, the whole thing is complete nonsense. I mean, the dual use of the zyklon, it's accepted it was used to delouse clothes and stuff and barracks, and it was used for gas tubes as well. Well, if you believe that, you believe it. I don't. It's simple as that.
Okay, well, I mean, one of the things I hear about when in these debates and from people, I mean, if there was no agenda by the Nazis, if there was no plan for genocide of the Jewish people, why were they rounding them up? What was the point of gathering them all up and throwing them in camps? Why do they do that?
Well, the Nazis created their own victim narrative, didn't they? A lot of Jews were dominating the economy, which there was a heavy involvement of Jews in business and commerce, and this is portrayed as a conspiracy. It may be just a better business than most other people. You had Jewish revolutionaries and stuff operating in Germany, and Hitler built on the ideas of Wilhelm Marr, who founded the Anti-Semitic League back in, I think, 1869. And they had this idea that Jews were aliens and they wanted them out of the country. And so they went about trying to expel them from the country, the same way that Idi Amin expelled the Asians. At the outbreak of World War II, Jews were declared enemy aliens, and so the same way that Japanese became enemy aliens in America. And they weren't actually all interned, but the concentration camps tended to fill up with Jews, with communists, and anybody who's perceived as enemies. And the same thing happened here. Of course, people returned under 18B because they opposed the war. The other thing we have to look at is we can't divorce that from the times. We're sitting here with air conditioning or central heating in front of a computer. You didn't have that in the 1930s. If you lived if you were an ordinary working person, chances are you had an outside toilet. Maybe no hot water in the house. People lived in terrible conditions, as we see it today. So you got to put that all into perspective. These were not holiday camps. And prisoners are always at the bottom of the food chain. So, it wasn't right what happened, but Hitler was partly responsible, but our leaders weren't totally blameless either. And the whole thing ended up with 50, 60 million people dead for what? This was on barely 20 years after the Second World War, after the First World War, the Great War, which was about what? It was an assassination, and various alliances were swung into action, and the whole thing became just a complete nightmare. If you look at the course of the 20th century, we still haven't learned lessons now with what's going on in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing I will say, we're talking about the Nazis now and what they done during World War II, and there's so much fear of a repeat And I mean, if you're coming from a nationalistic point of view, you're treading on eggshells, or you sound just like the Nazis back in. You be careful. We don't want to go down that road. And there's that fear element to it. But yet, anything that's reminiscent, as we were talking about earlier, the Soviet Union, Bolsheviks, anything that's reminiscent of those agendas. And all of a sudden, it's not, it's not as offensive, and not as, the amount of people that died there as well.
I mean, it's as bad. I mean, when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, 70s was really bad. The hysteria over so-called racism, and I mean, basically, in this country, you had a large immigrant population. Well, you had the Asians coming in and people coming in from all over the place. And the natives resented this. They wanted to keep Britain white, or relatively white. And there were others who didn't want this. And you had all this well-documented hysteria, well-orchestrated hysteria by the so-called anti-Nazi League, which was a front for the Socialist Workers' Party, and other groups. And they just went berserk. It was absolute madness. But now there's a prospect of literally millions of people swarming into the country. The Islington set aren't too happy about that. But of course they can't say it's about race, which it is. And they want to put the brakes on it. I don't see anything wrong with that. There's a couple of people, an American Jew and an Egyptian Arab, have come up with separate plans. They want to house all the world's refugees. They want to buy a couple of islands off the Greek coast and dump them all there, which I think is a great idea.
Well, I can't see that impressing the globalists too much and their precious communist-like agenda. So I don't think they'll be cheerleading that one.
Well, certainly there are people who are lobbying for. I mean, the whole United Nations was set up to be as a world government of sorts, and it's amazing how many people fall for this ludicrous notion that this is somehow idealistic. Of course, a government that controls the whole world, if there's too many people in this country, we'll dump a few there. If they will do whatever they want, basically. And it's an absolute to have any organisation having power over the entire world would be catastrophic for the entire world.
Okay, well, David.
Gosh, I mean, we could go on for hours, couldn't we? You'll have to come back on the show at some point, Alexandra. I mean, I think we're getting to that time when we've got to round off. I mean, what do I want to say to sort of put closure on where I'm coming from? I remember walking around Auschwitz a few years ago, and strange thoughts were on my mind. It was a very pleasant day. The sun was shining, and I thought, if those stories are true, what on earth would the murderers have gone home and talked about at lunchtime to their wives? Hi, honey, I killed 100 people this morning. That doesn't sound right. And I thought at the time there's something wrong with that type of narrative. But I'll confess I don't know what to think. Am I right in saying you think a number of different things were happening during that period in Germany, and some of which went horribly wrong, some of which are misunderstood, and that there's not a single narrative here? We're looking at different things. Is that right, Alexander?
Well, yeah, Nazi Germany wasn't a totalitarian state, but it was a police state, and nobody in his right mind wants to live in a police state.
Yeah.
Well, maybe if you're wearing the uniform, but as soon as you say anything, as soon as you step out of line over anything, it will crush you. In fact, America's leading National Socialist theorist, Harold Covington, I never actually met Wicked Harold, but I've corresponded with him. He espouses open praise for Hitler, but I can assure you that from his other writings, that if he'd lived in Nazi Germany, he would have ended up in the camp. He would have been an enemy of the regime, no doubt about that. Most people just want freedom.
Yeah.
And it's social justice warriors and the like. They don't really want freedom. They just want to impose their agendas on everyone, and have this idea that if they take the wealth from the top 1%, on the top 0.1%. Everything will be, and give it to the rest of us according to their formula. Everything will be wonderful. Well, it's been tried and it doesn't work.
So we're looking at different types of narrative, and we're also looking at people that are arguing about figures. Is that a correct analysis?
Yeah. I mean, it's, well, the thing is that you can't in any way say anything that goes against the prevailing narrative of Nazi evil. There's this, what's that? There's a law, isn't there? Somebody mentioned Hitler.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I forget what it's called now. The first one to mention Hitler loses. Yeah, I mean, it's just Nazism has been demonized. But if you look at what's been going on in America, Guantanamo Bay, you had people interned for 14, 15 years without trial. You've got all sorts of repressive laws there. You've got things going on in the Deep South. There's this business with Ferguson. A lot of that is hype, but there have been some. You saw this guy Walter Scott was shot dead by that police officer, shot in the back. And if somebody had been walking around with a video in his pocket, as happens nowadays, that would have gone unrecorded. There's injustice everywhere, but we don't solve those injustices by clamping down on any sort of dissent and demonising a bygone era.
Oh, we must talk. That's my view. We all must talk. Paul, my dear, I think that's me done for this evening. How about you?
Yeah, I'd just like to touch on one last thing. I mean, Alexander, you've obviously got your opinion, and a lot of our listeners will have their opinion. But where do you see all this going? I mean, do you see the history books changing, or do you see things staying as they are? Where do you think, this Holocaust revision, where it's going to lead?
Well, you can never get at the actual truth of anything at the bottom line, can you? Even if it's written in documents, because documents written by people. I think what will happen is that the media will keep on lying about the Second World War and demonising revisionists. But maybe 100 years from now, if man still exists, we'll have a more realistic picture of it. But for me, there are more important things. I'm not living in the past. The war ended 11 years before I was born. So I've got other things to do, and I've got a lot of time left. We know I was getting any younger, so we've got things to do in the meantime.
Okay, well, Alexander, it's been great having you on. Is there anything you'd like to let our listeners know about before we?
No, that's fine.
Yeah,
check out my website. That's anything else.
Yeah, we'll link all that on the page and everything. So that'll be great. And thanks again. And it's as David said, it'll be great to have you back on to have another discussion sometime.
Okay, nice to speak to you.
And that was Alexander Barron. Enjoy that, David?
Well, it shows you can have a rational debate about the most extraordinary of human events. I'll tell you what I was thinking during your questions. Maybe it's time to put that particular tragedy in human history into a bigger context, into a wider context. As everybody knows, I do a lot of work with the Central Asians, and I've done a lot of work on Central Asian literature this summer. And some of the figures and some of the disasters and some of the martial war catastrophes I've read about are horrific compared to what we've just discussed. So, I think that's a subversive show, because you can discuss the most terrible things. I feel empowered by that. What about you, Paul?
Yeah. No, one thing I will say, we can certainly look at World War II, 60 odd million innocent men, women and children died. So whatever way you look at it, whatever agenda, whatever events you look at, the whole thing was something to avoid, without a shadow of a doubt. But I do find there's a little bit of an agenda where this stuff is used, which is a bit cheap and a cheap shot kind of thing, if you ask me. And it's from the extreme left wing. I'm often left leaning myself with certain political things, but I'm not. I don't really go for any extreme. But the extreme left wing, they use this kind of story, these kind of events, to protect their own globalist agenda that's going on at the moment, this communist kind of thing that's going on, that if anyone stands in a way and acts against it or speaks against it, you suddenly look at yourself and you feel like you've got a Nazi uniform on it and you're just about to get arrested. And that's what I don't like to see when events like this are used politically today, which I think they are, and that's why it's such a hot topic today, because it's being used politically.
Yeah. I mean, look, human history's scattered with scare words, isn't it? In the Middle Ages, witch would have got you burnt and probably your whole village surrounded and beaten. In the 1950s in America, it was communist. So at the moment, I suppose it's Nazi, used as a term of abuse and used as a way to ridicule people's opinions. We've all got to grow up a bit. And my view's always been that unless we can discuss these things and get to the truth, I'm an optimist, you know that, Paul. I think things are going to work out in the long run. But why do we have to torture ourselves by making it the really long way round to truth and happiness? Why can't we sit down and discuss things sensibly and say, okay, we're all to blame. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, no, well said. I would like to also add on to that. I mean, we're nattering away here, but it's interesting. I mean, you get nationalists today that are very worried for their country around Europe and in the Western world. They think something's going on, and then there's the other guys that tell them to shut up and you stop being this or that. And the thing is, I mean, we look to World War II as a lesson in how not to react, how not to behave. That's not the way we should be, and absolutely we can look and learn a lot from World War II in that regard. But why aren't we also looking at World War II in the problems that were created before, that created these monsters and these bad things that happened? It seems like we're quite prepared to spot a reactionary group and compare them to a reactionary group in World War II, but we're not prepared to address any problems that create reactionary groups, because if these things have been proven to happen, then we should be being cautious in all fronts, and that's what I don't understand, and why more people don't see that.
Well, as you know, I've got a very deep interest in psychoanalysis and so on. But there was a marvelous book by an analyst called Wilhelm Reich, no pun intended, a leftist, of course, who wrote a book called The Mass Psychology of Fascism, where, you can actually look at that today. It's all to do with rumour and entente as opposed to anything rational, which is what he was really getting at. And we've really got to stop that in our society if we're going forward. I believe that. I'm encouraged by tonight's show. I mean, it was a bit meandery, a bit all over the place, but I'm encouraged. We can, even if one Jew, even if one person of that ethnic extraction was killed in that way during the war, it is an absolute tragedy beyond belief. So it's not about head counts necessarily. What it is about is growing up and realizing we can all do terrible things. This country included has done lots and lots of terrible things. Let's admit it to each other and move on. The future is what we need to embrace. The past mustn't be allowed to crush us.
And with that, I think we can call it quits for today. It's been another fascinating show. Thank you for tuning in, folks, and please link the show to your friends. Tell your friends about the show, and more importantly, keep downloading the show. We will be back soon with some more fascinating discussion. Until then, have yourselves a great week, and we look forward to speaking with you soon. Bye.
Chelsea.